scholars started to look at the text within the Bible less so as, a pure historical theological record, and much more of forms of ideology and propaganda to promote ideas. What we discover is that these are very heavily biased. They're very programmatic, very late expressions of what this world actually looked like. When it came to the worship of Asherah, which is something that by and large took place within the household, women played a very, very prominent role in the practice and performance of this religion. And this is obviously this is part of the problem, it seems. The people say to Jeremiah that we've been worshiping the Queen of Heaven for forever. Our forefathers were worshiping the Queen of Heaven back in Jerusalem long before Nebuchadnezzar ever came and invaded Jerusalem. And all this time, when we used to worship the Queen of Heaven, things were good. We were prosperous.
Wow.
Our nation was stable ever since Josiah basically started getting after us for this. That's when things started to go to hell.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm in a different location right now because I have to do some babysitting. But anyways, Dr. Kipp. So, man, I wish we had more time. This is a huge topic, but this will be for a course, and you're going to get all of the time you need to dig into this amazing subject about the ancient Israelite traditions that predate the text of the Bible. And so if you watch my channel for a period of time, you'll know that I talk about this stuff a lot on my channel. I did a video where I read the text that is passed down by Eusebius and Philo of Byblos about this ancient Phoenician theogony, I guess you would call it. It's kind of like Hesiod's text where it's got all these different gods and the successions, but that mentions these gods named El and Elion, and there's two of them. One of them's El, the other one's Elion, and there's a Yahweh, and then there's all these, there's Asherah, and there's all these different gods, and so that's the Phoenician side. There's also the Baal cycle. We have all these different traditions all across the Levant, and I want to ask you, what do we know about this, and what does archaeology and manuscript evidence show us about these texts, and where do these ideas coming from?
Wow, there's a lot there. So the I mean, we know quite a bit, but also frustratingly, there's a lot of gaps and things that we just don't see. Maybe a way to answer this question is to sort of go through how some of what we came to know, what we did happened. So, from the time that the Bible was being copied and reproduced, through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance and into the modern world, for most of that time, it was just widely accepted that the presentation of history and religion that we read about throughout the Old Testament was just a clear, historically reliable picture of the religious landscape. And then when archaeology proper started to develop as a scientific academic discipline, people started digging in and around the area, and at first, digging in great centers like in Mesopotamia, in Nineveh, in Babylon, and some of these great centers. We started discovering all sorts of comparative literature that looked an awful lot like what we see in the Bible, and that had people scratching their heads, going, "Wow, maybe there's more to what's happening in the Bible story than we at first thought." And then when they started digging in and around Israel, The great pioneer in this was um, well, there was Otto Eisfeld at first, but then William Albright really uh, developed what we recognize as so-called biblical archaeology.
Right.
Um, and this was founded on the expectation that if we just open the pages of our Bible and we pay attention to what the text is saying, we're going to go to these places,
Find
we're going to
everything.
dig them up, we're going to find them. And that didn't happen.
Wow.
Like the amazing thing was that time and time and time again, archaeologists would look at what's said in the biblical text, and when they would go to these digs, what they discovered was something that was in many instances dramatically different
Right.
than what the Bible promoted. So what really happened was a recognition that, hold on, the if the Bible is not providing an accurate, clear picture of this religious world, then what is it doing? And that has really, I think, caused a bit of a revolution within biblical studies, where
Wow.
um, scholars started to look at the text within the Bible less so as a pure historical theological record, and much more of forms of ideology and propaganda to promote ideas. So we can look back and we can see, yeah, there is history in here. I mean, there really was a king, Omri, who ruled in Samaria. Um, but the way that the Bible presents this guy is so different from how, the historical record presents this guy. Let's pay close attention to what the Bible's saying about him. But what we discover is that these are very heavily biased. They're very programmatic, very late expressions of what this world actually looked like.
That's what I want to ask you about. You said it's a very late expression.
Yeah.
How can scholars pinpoint when this transition from polytheism into monotheism becomes the norm?
No.
Okay.
It's very, very difficult to do that. And there's a whole complicated issue here that I don't even really get into this in my course. This whole complicated issue of when we can even start talking about a Bible or even a Torah is a sticky issue. Um, we have, and I think even all the way into like the Hellenistic period, uh, the idea of monotheism is complicated and it's not clear. I think there's a movement that you can kind of track towards that. And at various points, I've done this in some of my videos where I've shown, there's no dates on this, but I've shown basically like a timeline where I've isolated a handful of individual texts which appear to be moving from this old polytheistic worldview into something that's more monotheistic. So, stuff that you see, places in some of the Psalms or in Deuteronomy 32, the so-called Song of Moses, or even in something like the Genesis 1 creation story, looks like it preserves these early polytheistic ideas, whereas some of this later movement towards monotheism you see more clearly presented in places like Ezra and Nehemiah, or some of the late prophets like Malachi or Haggai, or even second Isaiah. But even there, it's like the edges of this is very fuzzy.